Before I tell you what happened to my family in the Black Pine Valley, I need you to understand one thing. I am not a superstitious person. I am a fourth-grade teacher who grades multiplication worksheets and packs lunches and drives a minivan with a cracked rear windshield that I keep meaning to fix. I believe in what I can see, what I can touch, what I can hold up to light and examine. I believe in the measured and the known, or I did. Until the August, my husband Aaron decided we needed to go back to his grandmother's property, 112 acres of dense Wisconsin forest that had been sitting empty since her death, waiting for us to decide what to do with it. Until the August, we drove 4 hours north from Milwaukee in that cracked windshield minivan with our 13-year-old daughter Harper and our 9-year-old son Miles and a week's worth of camping gear. Convinced that what we needed was silence and open air and time together without screens, we got the silence. We got more silence than any of us ever wanted. What we did not get was safety. What we did not get was the ordinary family camping week that Aaron had promised. What we found in the Black Pine Valley, in the 200 meters of ancient forest that separated his grandmother's old cabin from the eastern tree line, was something that had been waiting there for a very long time. Patient in the way that things are patient when they do not experience time the way we do, something that moved without appearing to move, something that was always closer than it had been. Every time you opened your eyes, my name is Delia Voss. I am 37 years old. And what I am about to tell you is the truest thing I have ever written down. The property had a name. Aaron's grandmother. A small, fierce woman named Ida Voss, who had emigrated from Norway as a young woman and spent the rest of her life in rural Wisconsin with the methodical competence of someone who had decided to belong somewhere and then done the work of belonging. Edda had called the property Skagheim, Forest Home. Aaron had grown up visiting it every summer until he was 16, and the 2 years before her death, he'd been too busy with his career and our lives to make the trip. And then she was gone, and the property was ours, and the guilt of those 2 missed years sat in him like a stone. This trip was the stone being moved. I understood that. I had supported it completely. The cabin was a two-room structure that Edda's late husband had built in the 1960s. From timber he'd cut himself on the property. It had been maintained. Edda had seen to that with characteristic thoroughness, gauging a local handyman to winterize and inspect each year, and was structurally sound if spare. 2 rooms, a main room with a kitchen area, a wood-burning stove, a table, and 2 cots. A smaller back room that had been Edda's bedroom, with a proper bed and a single window facing east into the trees. We arrived in the early evening of the first Sunday in August. The drive-in from the county road was along a 2-track gravel lane, through progressively denser forest, the ordinary mixed northern Wisconsin hardwoods of the outer property giving way, in the last half-mile, to the Black Pine Grove that gave the valley its name. Eastern white pine, a species that in this section of the property had reached a scale that felt improbable. Trunks 2 and 3 feet in diameter, their bark black-red in the evening light. Their canopy interlocking overhead into something cathedral-like and complete. No sky visible through the canopy. The lane running through them in a corridor of filtered green dark light. "Cool," said Miles from the back seat. He was looking out the window, with the specific appreciation of a 9-year-old for whom enormous trees existed on the same scale of impressiveness as large vehicles. And deep swimming pools? Harper didn't say anything. She was looking at the trees with an expression I couldn't read, not the bored, performed indifference she'd been wearing for most of the drive, which was her standard expression for family activities she hadn't chosen. Something else. Something more attentive. "You okay?" I asked her. "They're watching," she said. "What?" She blinked, and the expression reset into the standard teenage opacity. "Nothing." "Never mind," I snorted. "The thing I do, the teacher's habit, mother's habit, of storing things and returning to them later, when I have time and context to understand them. I did not return to it until it was almost too late. The cabin was exactly as Aaron had described it. Sparse and clean and smelling of pine sap and the particular mustiness of a building that is well built but rarely occupied. Aaron was immediately emotional in the contained way of men who don't entirely trust their own feelings, moving through the rooms with his hands on the walls, touching the windowsills, standing in his grandmother's back bedroom for a long moment before coming back out to help unload the van. We had dinner on the narrow porch, sandwiches from the cooler, eaten in the last of the evening light. The forest pressed close on three sides. The fourth side, to the west, was a small cleared meadow that Ida had kept mown and that had reverted, in the year and a half since her death, to a mix of tall grass and wildflower that was beautiful in a slightly wild and abandoned way. The black pine grove was to the east. From the porch, in the falling evening light, could see perhaps 40 feet into it. Before the density of the trunks and the failing light turned it into shadow and suggestion, it was not threatening, exactly. But it was present in a way that the western meadow was not, an active presence rather than a passive one. "There's something weird about those trees," Harper said, at some point during dinner. Aaron looked up. "The black pines? They're old growth. Some of them are 300 years old. Your great-grandmother loved them." "I know," Harper said. "That's not what I mean." Aaron looked at me. I shrugged slightly. I had noticed nothing unusual. The trees were trees. Very large, very old, very present. But trees. "What do you mean?" I asked Harper. She looked at the grove for a moment. The light was almost gone now, the trees reduced to dark vertical shapes against a slightly less dark sky. "I mean," she said carefully, choosing her words with the precision she used when she wanted to be taken seriously, "that every time I stop looking at them and then look back, they seem closer than they were." Who had been absorbed in a sandwich, looked up with wide eyes. "That's because you're not paying attention," he said authoritatively. "Your brain fills in stuff when you're not looking. Miss Pellegrino taught us that." "I know what my brain does," Harper said, with the tone of a 13-year-old addressing a 9-year-old. "I'm telling you what the trees are doing." We finished dinner in the ordinary small talk of families unwinding after a long drive, but I kept my eyes on the eastern tree line while the others talked. And when the dark was complete, and there was nothing to see but the shapes of the biggest trunks in the pale starlight, I understood why Harper had chosen her words so carefully. The trees were not threatening. They were not making sounds. They were not doing anything that could be quantified or reported or confirmed, but they were paying attention. I could feel it the way you feel another person's attention on you across a room, that prickle at the back of awareness. That subtle shift in the quality of the air, a focus directed from the darkness of the grove, out toward the lit rectangle of the cabin porch where 4 people sat eating sandwiches and adjusting to a new place. I am a 4th-grade teacher. I believe in the measurable and the known. I went inside and told myself it was just the dark. Monday was, by the standards of what came after, entirely normal. We hiked the trail that circled the eastern perimeter of the property, 2-mile loop that Aaron knew from childhood and navigated without hesitation. His body remembering the route, the way bodies remember things the mind has tried to let go. He was happy in the specific way of someone returning to a place that holds good memories, looser than usual, more talkative, telling stories about his grandmother that I'd heard before, but that sounded different here. In the place they'd happened, Miles collected things. As Miles always did, interesting stones, a shed snakeskin, a fragment of bird eggshell, the color of pale sky. He narrated his finds with the scientific enthusiasm of a natural-born field researcher, describing the properties of each object with the cheerful precision of someone who had not yet learned that the world might not share his level of interest. Harper walked and listened with the contained energy of a teenager who was, despite herself, being interested. She asked Aaron questions about the grandmother she'd met only twice before age 5 and remembered barely at all. She wanted to know what Ida had been like, how she'd spent her days out here, whether she'd been lonely. "Never," Aaron said. "She found the forest sufficient." That's the word she used. Sufficient. She meant it as high praise. Harper considered that. "I can see that," she said. "It's a lot." It was a lot. The black pine grove in daylight was extraordinary, The scale of the old trees, the filtered green light, the deep carpeting of needles that muffled every sound and gave movement through the grove a dreamlike quality, as though you were walking slightly outside the normal rules of physics. The air smelled of resin and time. Every surface was colonized with growth, moss, lichen, the small, insistent life forms that occupy every available substrate in old forest, and the trees were still. Perfectly still. The kind of stillness that belonged to things that had been in one place for centuries and had no reason to be anywhere else. At lunch, sitting on a fallen log near the trail's eastern turn, Alce produced a small spiral notebook from his jacket pocket. He had been writing in it at intervals during the hike, and I had assumed he was cataloging his finds. "What's in the notebook?" I asked. "Measurements," he said, with a satisfaction that suggested he was pleased I'd asked. He opened it and showed me. The pages were covered in his careful, slightly oversized 9-year-old handwriting. Numbers, distances, compass directions, miles. I said, "Where did you get the compass?" "Dad's pack," he said, with the serenity of someone who does not consider this to require explanation. "I borrowed it. I'm measuring the trees." Aaron looked over. "Is measuring them how? How far they are from each other?" "And from the path." He showed me a page with a rough sketch, a map, I realized, of the section of the grove we'd hiked through. Tree positions marked and numbered, distances noted between them. "I'm going to measure them again tomorrow," he said, "to see if the numbers change." Harper and I looked at each other, not with alarm, with the specific look of a mother and a 13-year-old who share the same instinct and are simultaneously unsure whether to trust it. "Why would the numbers change?" Aaron asked, with the gentle reasonableness of a father who does not want to alarm his son. "I don't know," Miles said, "but Harper said the trees look closer every time she blinks. So I want to check if they actually are." He closed the notebook with finality. "Science," he said. We hiked back to the cabin. Aaron made a fire in the wood-burning stove, and we played cards, and the evening was warm and ordinary. But Miles put the notebook on the kitchen table with his compass on top of it, and before bed, I heard him telling Harper, through the wall of the back bedroom, where the two of them had claimed the single proper bed while Aaron and I took the cots, that he had taken very careful measurements and that tomorrow he would take them again. "Will it tell us if something's really happening?" Harper asked. "That's the whole point of measurement," he said. "Can't argue with numbers." I lay on my cot in the main room, with the wood stove ticking as it cooled and the forest pressing, close on 3 sides of the cabin walls, and I thought about my son, who was 9 years old and had brought a compass and a spiral notebook to a family camping trip because he trusted data more than instinct. He was right too, and I was right to be afraid of what the data was going to show. I woke at 2:17 in the morning. I know the time because I checked my phone immediately, a reflex. The cabin was dark, the stove cold, the forest outside. Absolutely silent in a way that registered as unusual before my conscious mind had caught up to why. Northern Wisconsin forest at night is not silent. It is full of sound, the whip-poor-will, the great horned owl, the coyote chorus that starts in the small hours and travels across the dark, insects, the small continuous movement of things that have the night to themselves. I had fallen asleep to these sounds. I had found them comforting in the specific way of sounds that prove the world is continuing to function. At 2:17, there was nothing. Not a sound, not an insect, not a breath of wind. I sat up on the cot. Aaron was asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even. Through the window above the kitchen table, the north-facing window that looked toward the edge of the property, I could see the pale wash of starlight on the meadow grass. I turned to the east-facing window, the one that looked toward the black pine grove. The grove was there. The dark shapes of the trunks, the interlocking canopy blocking all but the faintest starlight. Just as it had been at dinner at bedtime, every time I'd looked at it since we arrived. But closer, I did not blink. I kept my eyes on the tree line and I did not blink, and I measured the distance with my eyes. The way a teacher measures the distance between a student's desk and the front of the room. The way you calibrate space intuitively in a place you've been looking at all day. The nearest trees, the outermost edge of the grove. The trees closest to the cabin were nearer to the east-facing wall than they had been at dinner, not by feet, by inches, but measurably, undeniably closer. Then I blinked. One blink, involuntary, the body demanding its fraction of darkness. When I opened my eyes, the tree line was closer still, not by much, by perhaps 2 inches more, but I had been watching, had been right there. And in the 150 milliseconds of darkness that my body had required, something had moved. I shook Aaron awake. He came out of sleep with the disoriented good nature of a heavy sleeper, blinking, reaching for context. "Wah, Delia. Look at the east window," I said. He looked. He was silent for a moment, taking in the tree line and the way of someone who had spent many summers here, knew the distance between the cabin and the grove, the way he knew the distance between his hand and his face. There he stopped. "Closer," I said. "The dark makes distances, Aaron. They're closer." He was quiet. He sat up and looked at the window for a long time. "I need you to get Miles's notebook," I said. He got up without arguing, which told me that some part of him, the part that had grown up here and knew this place in its bones, already knew I was right. He found the notebook on the kitchen table and brought it back, and we looked at Miles's sketch by the light of my phone. According to Miles's measurements, the distance from the cabin's east wall to the nearest tree in the black pine grove was 31 feet, 2 inches. He had measured it twice from 2 different reference points and gotten the same number both times. He had noted the time of measurement, 3:45 p.m. It was now 2:17 a.m. 11 hours. I pressed my phone light against the east window and looked out. The nearest tree was not 31 feet away. I could not measure precisely in the dark. But I had taught in the same classroom for 9 years, and I knew what 30 feet looked like. And what I was seeing was not 30 feet, it was closer to 20. "We should wake the kids," I said, "and tell them what?" Aaron's voice was very careful. The voice he used when he was trying to be the steady one. "That the trees moved? In the dark." "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what we tell them, 'cause that's exactly what happened." He looked at the window again. His jaw was set, and his eyes were doing the thing they do when he is frightened and will not say so. "We leave at first light," he said. "We leave now," I said, and that was when we heard Miles scream. He wasn't hurt. I want you to know that first, because a mother telling this story needs you to know that before anything else. He was in the back bedroom, standing on the bed, pressed against the wall farthest from the east-facing window, his spiral notebook clutched to his chest like a shield, his face white in the beam of my phone light. The east-facing window of the back bedroom looked directly into the black pine grove. From this window, the nearest trees had always been closer than from the main room. The back bedroom jutted slightly eastward, toward the grove, an architectural quirk of the original construction. When we'd arrived, the view from this window had been the grove beginning at approximately 20 feet. The nearest trunk was now 6 feet from the glass. I stood in the doorway of the back bedroom and looked at that trunk and felt the floor of reality tilt slightly under me. Not the gentle uncertainty of someone questioning their perception, specific, nauseating tilt of someone whose perception has been confirmed. Harper was awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed beside Miles, her hand on his back. She looked at me over his head with an expression that was not panicked. Harper's particular form of courage under pressure was to go very still and very focused, a quality I had always loved in her, and said, "He woke up and looked out the window." "I know," I said. "I was looking at the trunk. House, 6 feet from the glass. The bark was deeply furrowed, black-red even in the dark, and across its surface something moved, not fast, not dramatically, slowly. A surface movement like the slow displacement of water, as though the bark itself was shifting in nearly imperceptible increments." "Mom," Miles said. His voice was trying very hard to be steady. I measured them again, before I went to sleep. At 8 o'clock, the nearest tree from this window was 19 feet. He opened the notebook to the last page. 2 sets of measurements. 3:45 p.m., 19 feet 4 inches. 8 p.m., 19 feet 1 inch. 3 inches in 4 hours, Harper said quietly. She had done the math before I had. "And 6 feet in 6 hours, Aaron said from behind me. I hadn't heard him come to the doorway. The 4. of us looked at the trunk 6 feet from the glass in the 2-something in the morning dark, and I made my decision. I am a methodical person. I am a planner and a list maker, and a person who thinks actions through before taking them. I made my decision in approximately 2 seconds. "We are leaving," I said, not at first light. Now, we pack the essentials. Sleeping bags, food, keys, and we drive south to the county road, and we find a motel, and we sleep there. Nobody argued. Not even Aaron, who has a complicated relationship with retreat, and who under ordinary circumstances would have wanted to stay and reason the problem through. He looked at the trunk outside the window and he said, "I'll get the keys." We packed in 8 minutes. Miles had his notebook. Harper had her phone and her book. Aaron had the keys and the cooler with the perishables.
Yes.
I had the car documents and my bag and the first aid kit, which I grabbed by reflex. We went out the front door, the west-facing door, toward the meadow, and walked to the van in the dark without looking east. I want to be honest about that. We chose not to look at the grove as we crossed to the vehicle. We looked west, toward the meadow and the dark sky above it. And we moved quickly and quietly and got into the van, and Aaron started the engine. The headlights came on, illuminated. In the 2-track gravel lane ahead of us, the path through the black pine grove, the lane that we had driven in on, the lane that 48 hours ago had run between rows of enormous old-growth pines at a comfortable distance on both sides. The lane was still there. But the trees were not at a comfortable distance. They were close. Close enough that the van, a standard minivan, nothing wide, would have to navigate carefully between them. Branches overhung from both sides, meeting overhead in an arch that had not been there when we arrived. The corridor of the lane had narrowed from something that felt wide enough to breathe in to something that felt deliberately constraining. "Can we get through?" I asked. Aaron measured it with his eyes. "I think so." "If I go slow—" "Go," I said. He went. The drive through the black pine grove on the way out was the longest 4 minutes of my life. 4 minutes at roughly 5 miles per hour. Aaron's knuckles white on the wheel, his attention absolute. Guiding the van through a corridor that kept feeling, and I knew this was my nervous system constructing threat from ambiguous data. I knew it, and it did not help, like it was getting narrower as we moved through it. Branches scraped the roof. Once, on the left side, the van's mirror folded as a trunk passed too close. The trees were not moving, not in the time I was watching them, not while the headlights were on them. They stood with the perfect stillness of things that had been in their positions for centuries, but they were not. Where they had been when we drove in, we came out at the county road at 2:45 in the morning. Aaron turned south. Nobody spoke for 5 miles. Then Miles said, from the back seat, in a voice that was trying hard and almost succeeding, "My measurements were right." "Yes," I said. "They were. That means it was real." "Yes," I said again. "Okay." A pause. "I'm going to need more pages in my notebook." I almost laughed. I love my son with everything I have. We found a motel in a small town called Brentford, 22 miles south of the property. The woman at the front desk looked at us, 2 adults and 2 children, arriving at 3 in the morning with sleeping bags and a cooler, with the professional and curiosity of someone who has checked in all varieties of human trouble and has learned that the stories are rarely her business. We got 2 rooms. Miles fell asleep within minutes, his notebook on the pillow beside him. Harper lay awake in the dark for a while, and then came to my room and sat on the end of the bed and said, "Tell me honestly, are we going back?" "No," I said. She exhaled. "Good. Did you know?" I asked when we arrived. "You said they were watching." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know." I felt something. Like the feeling you get in school when you walk into a room and everyone goes quiet. Like you've walked into an attention that was already there. She paused. "I thought it was just me being weird." "You weren't being weird," I said. She went back to her room. And I sat with Aaron in the yellow lamplight of the motel room. And he told me the thing he had been not telling me since we arrived at Skogheim. His grandmother, Edda, had left a letter, not to be opened until we visited the property she had known, the way of very old people who have been paying attention for a long time, that we would come eventually. Aaron had found the letter in the cabin's kitchen drawer on Monday morning while I'd been organizing the gear, and had read it alone, and had been processing it in his private way ever since. Unable to find the moment to share it, he showed it to me now. 2 pages, handwritten in Eda's precise, slightly formal English, dated 6 months before her death. I am going to reproduce what she wrote as accurately as I can from memory, because Aaron kept the letter and I read it twice in the motel room and once more later. When we were home, she wrote, the black pines had been on this land longer than any record. The oldest ones in the eastern grove, the ones you can see from the cabin's back window, are not trees in the way you understand trees. I have known this since my 3rd year on the property, when I first noticed the grove advancing in the night. Not every night. Not even every week. Only when the grove decides there is something it needs to assess. Something new has come to the land. She wrote that in her 38 years on the property. The grove had advanced only 4 times before the year she wrote the letter. Once when a lumber company sent surveyors. Once when a hunting party camped on the eastern edge without her permission. Once when she brought a friend from the city who she described as a frightened person who made the air feel small. And once when she herself was very ill and the grove, she believed, was coming to look at her. She had recovered, and the grove had receded, and she had spent the following spring doing what she did every spring, walking among the black pines slowly, with her hands open, speaking to them in Norwegian, the way her own grandmother had taught her to speak to old forests. She wrote that the grove was not malicious. This was the word she used, not malicious. But it was ancient, and it was large, and it operated by a logic that had nothing to do with human comfort or human time. It came closer to things that unsettled it or that it needed to understand. It would continue coming closer until it had finished its assessment, or until the unsettling thing was removed, she wrote. Do not let it surround you. If the grove begins to advance, leave by the western lane, the meadow side, immediately. Not in the morning. Immediately, the western meadow is neutral ground. The black pines do not cross into the meadow. I do not know why, but they do not. She wrote that she was sorry she had not found a way to say this in person, that she was leaving it in the letter because she had not known how to begin the conversation, that she hoped we would understand. She signed it with her name and added beneath the signature, in smaller handwriting, tell the children the forest is not their enemy. It is only very old and very careful. It takes time to trust what it does not recognize. I read the letter twice and handed it back to Aaron. Outside the motel window, the dawn was beginning, a grape-pink seam of light at the horizon line. The first birds starting their morning. We left by the western lane, I said. I know, he said. She said to leave immediately. I know. He looked at the letter in his hands. I should have told you right away. I'm sorry. I thought about the 6-foot gap between the back bedroom window and the nearest trunk. About the Van Meer's folding in the narrowed lane. About Miles's measurements, 31 feet, 19 feet, 6 feet. About the 2 inches that had moved in the single blink I'd allowed myself at 2 in the morning. Why did it advance on us? I asked. What were we that unsettled it? Aaron was quiet for a long moment. Strangers, he said. We were strangers. Eda had been there for 38 years. The grove knew her. We were new, unknown, and I think he stopped. I think the property has been empty for a year and a half. Since she died, and something in the grove has been waiting. Not knowing what was coming next, not knowing if the new people would be like her or like the lumber surveyors. I thought about what Eda had written, about the frightened friend who made the air feel small, about Harper's instinct at the tree line and how she'd felt a watching attention from the moment we arrived. It was assessing us, I said. Yes, Aaron said, because we were unknown quantities, and it was going to keep coming until it finished its assessment or until we left. That's what she wrote. We sat with that. The dawn strengthened. Miles's voice came through the wall, talking to Harper. He was awake, and from the sound of it, he was already back to his notebook. I heard Harper's voice in reply, and Miles's laugh. and the completely ordinary sound of my two children waking up in a motel room. After the most frightening night of all of our lives, this is the part people find surprising. We went back, not immediately. Not that day. We spent Monday in Brentford, a town of 6,000 people with a decent diner and a hardware store and a gas station and a library. It was open on Monday mornings. We rested and ate, and Miles filled for more pages of his notebook with questions, which was how he processed things. Harper read her book and texted her friends and existed in the offline way of a teenager who has had enough offline experience in 48 hours to last a year. I called my sister, who is a person I call when I need to think out loud. I told her the whole thing: the trees, Miles's, measurements, Edda's letter, the 2-40-5-in- the morning drive through the narrowed lane. She was quiet for a moment when I finished, and then she said the thing she always says when she's being truly helpful rather than merely comforting. "So what are you going to do?" I knew what I was going to do. I'd known since I read Ida's letter. Ida had been on that property for 38 years. She had walked among the black pines with her hands open and spoken to them in Norwegian. The grove had known her. It had come to her window when she was ill and receded, and she recovered and coexisted with her across nearly 4 decades of seasons. She had loved those trees. Loved them the way you love something you have taken the time to know, not sentimentally. Not the easy love of a postcard wilderness, but the specific love of a relationship built across time and attention and earned trust. And she had left us the property. Not to sell, not to develop. She had left it to Aaron specifically because she trusted him to be the kind of person who would do what needed to be done to keep it what it was. "We're going to go back," I told my sister, "and we're going to introduce ourselves properly." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Then how does one introduce oneself to a forest?" "I have no idea," I said, "but Edda did it, so it can be done." I talked to Aaron that afternoon, and then to the kids together fully and honestly. Without the protective simplification that parents sometimes deploy for children. Miles was 9, but Miles had measured the trees. He deserved the full account. Harper was 13 and had felt the attention from the moment we arrived. She deserved it even more. I told them what the letter said. I told them what Aaron and I believed it meant. I told them that we were not required to go back, that the property could be managed from a distance and the grove could be left to itself, and that if any one of us said no, the answer was no. Miles said, "I want to measure them when they're not advancing, to have both data sets." Harper said, "Grandma Edda loved those trees for 38 years. That seems like information." Aaron said nothing because he was crying in the quiet way he cries, and I put my hand over his. We went back on Wednesday morning. In the daylight, in the early morning light that comes clear and yellow in early August in northern Wisconsin, the kind of light that makes even very large, very old, slightly frightening forests look like themselves rather than like threats. The lane through the black pine grove was wide. Not as wide as it had been on our arrival. The trees had not fully returned to their original positions, and I suspected they might not until the grove had finished what it needed to do, but wide enough to drive through without the mirrors folding. We walked into the black pine grove at 8 in the morning, the 4 of us through the eastern tree line from the cabin side. Aaron had found in Edda's kitchen a small handwritten notebook that turned out to be a kind of field guide to the property. Notes in Norwegian that he translated slowly, haltingly, with the Norwegian he'd learned as a child and half forgotten. Notes about the trees. Which ones were oldest? Which ones she'd named. What she'd learned about the grove's behavior over the years. We did what the notebook suggested. It's translated into the only version of it we knew how to do. We walked slowly. Aaron spoke in Norwegian, where he knew the words, in English where he didn't, telling the grove who we were. Not performing it, not dramatically. Just talking. The way you'd talk to a very large dog you'd never met, calmly, quietly, without sudden movements, with the specific intention of being understood. I had brought things. This sounds strange, and I know it. I had gone to the hardware store on Monday and bought a small hand trowel, and I had brought seeds, wildflower seeds. It's the kind you scatter in meadows, that I'd found at the hardware store's garden section. an offering of a kind. The only kind I knew how to make, a gesture toward the idea that we intended to add something to this place rather than take from it. Harper walked with her hands open. She had been the first to feel the grove's attention, and she moved through it now with an openness that made my heart tight. That specific courage of young people who are afraid and go forward anyway, without armor, trusting the world to meet them honestly. Miles measured. Of course he measured. He moved through the grove with his notebook and his compass, taking measurements at intervals, recording the distances between the old trunks with the methodical focus of a scientist doing what scientists do in the presence of phenomena they don't yet understand. He was not afraid. He was fascinated. And Miles has always been stronger than fear. And the grove, the 400-year black pines, enormous red-black trunks, the interlocking canopy overhead stood still, perfectly still. The absolute, certain stillness of things that are attending. I cannot tell you what happened in that grove was magical. I cannot tell you I heard a voice, or saw a sign, or received a communication in any form I could document. What I can tell you is that the quality of the attention changed. The watching pressure that Harper had felt from the first moment on the porch. The focus of the grove directed toward us shifted. It did not lift. It changed. From the focused attention of something assessing the unknown to something else. Something more like the sustained regard of something that has decided to wait and see. To give the unknown time to become the known. We spent 3 hours in the grove. We walked. Aaron talked. I planted seeds in a clearing near the oldest tree, pressing them into the needle-covered soil with my fingers. Harper sat at the base of one of the largest trees and read from her book, Not to the Tree. Just for herself, in the grove, present and real and unhidden. Miles completed his measurements and recorded them. He showed me the notebook at the end. The trees were back to 31 feet from the cabin wall. All of them. Every measurement he'd taken matched the original set from Monday afternoon. They went back, he said. I said, that means they were done assessing. I think so. He closed the notebook and looked up at the tree above us, a tree that was, by Aaron's translation of Ida's notes, approximately 340 years old. A tree that had been growing in this soil since before the United States existed as a country, since before most of the human history that felt foundational to my understanding of the world, Miles said to the tree, conversationally, with the ease of a 9-year-old who has not yet learned that talking to trees is something adults are embarrassed by. We're going to come back. My dad owns this land now. We'll take care of it. The grove was still. The light came through the canopy in its green-filtered columns. Somewhere above us, in the upper branches of the oldest tree, something moved, a bird, or the wind finding a gap in the canopy, or something else. Something that was not threatening. Something that was simply present and aware and as old as the soil it stood in. I chose to believe it was acknowledgement. I know that is not scientific. I am choosing it anyway. We stayed for the rest of the week, all 4 of us. We slept in the cabin and ate on the porch and hiked the trails and swam in the creek on the south edge of the property and lived in the place with the specific intention of being known by it. The grove did not advance again. Miles measured every morning and every evening and recorded every measurement with the dedication of a researcher who understands that a single data point is an anomaly, but a consistent data set is a truth. Every measurement matched. The trees stood in their positions with the settled certainty of things that have made a decision. Harper sat in the grove on 3 of those afternoons, alone with her book in her open hands. She came back each time looking like she'd slept well, which she is not always inclined to do. On the last evening, she told me that the grove felt like a library. Not scary, she said. Just full of things that have been there a long time. Pause. I want to come back, like Grandma Ida did. Every year? Then we will, I said. Aaron walked every trail on the property over those 4 days. He used the Norwegian field notebook as a guide, moving from Edda's landmark to Edda's landmark, relearning the place she had loved. He came back from one afternoon walk with pine sap on his jacket and a look on his face that I recognized as the expression of someone who has put a stone down. She would have liked us to be here, he said. I said, I think she spent a long time hoping we would. We drove home on Sunday. The lane through the black pine grove was wide and clear, the same as it had always been in my imagination of a family property, the same as it would be, I believed now, every time we came. As long as we came with our hands open and our attention honest, and the genuine intention of being part of the place, rather than merely visitors to it, Miles was already planning the return trip. He had questions about tree root communication, about the mechanism by which very old forest organisms might coordinate movement, about what research existed on the behavioral capacities of old-growth stands. He had a list of scientists he wanted to email. Harper was drawing in a sketchbook she'd bought at the Brentford hardware store. Quick sketches of the grove, not the trees as obstacles or threats, but as individuals. The specific character of each enormous trunk, the way each one had accumulated its centuries differently. Aaron was driving, steadier than I'd seen him in years, and I sat in the passenger seat with the cracked windshield minivan, eating up the miles south, and thought about what a fourth-grade teacher who believes in the measurable and the known does with an experience that exceeds the known. She updates the known. That is what you do. You do not flatten the experience into something that fits the existing framework. You expand the framework. I went back to school in September and I taught my students about old-growth forests, not as a conservation talking point, not as background scenery and a lesson about ecosystems, but as what they are. Living systems of extraordinary age and complexity, operating by logics we are only beginning to understand. Systems that communicate. Systems that respond. Systems that have been in their places for centuries and have developed, in that time, a relationship with their territory that makes our few-year human. Relationships look like first drafts. I told them that old forests deserve the kind of attention we give to things we want to understand, that the world is full of intelligences that don't look like ours, that the right response to a thing you don't understand is curiosity, not fear. I did not tell them about the trees moving closer every time I blinked. They are 9 years old. There is time for that later, but I told them that the forest is not scenery, that it is not a resource or a backdrop or a thing that exists for our benefit, that it is alive in ways that the word alive barely covers, that it is old in ways the word old cannot contain. And I told them that when you go into a forest, any forest, but especially the old ones, you should go with your hands open and your attention honest, and the understanding that you are the newcomer, that whatever is in those trees has been there longer than you can imagine and will be there long after you are gone. Go with respect, I told them. Go knowing that something very old is watching, and that what it decides about you depends on what you show it. I am a fourth-grade teacher. I believe in the measurable and the known. I also believe in the Black Pine Valley, in Ida Voss, who walked her grove for 38 years, in my son who measured the trees with a borrowed compass and trusted the numbers, in my daughter who went into the old forest with her hands open and came back saying it felt like a library. I believe in what happened to my family in that grove, what it taught us, and what we carry from it. The trees were moving closer every time I blinked, and what they were closing in on was not something to be afraid of. They were closing in on the truth of what we were, the truth of whether we were worth knowing, I think. In the end, we were. I think Etta made sure of it. From wherever she is, in the letter she left, in the notebook she kept, in the 38 years she spent, teaching a grove of ancient trees that the people who came after her could be trusted. That is the inheritance she left us. Not the acres, not the cabin, the trust of something 400 years old that is worth more than any of us knew to ask for. End.